Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, one, welcome, two, welcome, three, to the Vision of the Future review. This is Vision of the Future, of course, by RazorClawX, a very robust, prolific anime man with a chiseled face, the quality of his model work. Now, if you've seen Vision of the Future, if you've seen his model work, if you've seen Wanderers of Sorceria, his Warcraft 3 campaign, then you know, saying the quality of his model work, well, I'll just leave that one for, if you know, you know. So when it comes to Vision of the Future, one thing I do know is its release date. So the original campaign is a 4-part series, 5 if you count the Zegitotal conversion, but the bulk of it was done in between 1999 and 2002. And so that's where we see the campaigns that we played that this review concerns. Now, I did reference in the Zegitotal conversion that I did have past experience with Vision of the Future. I played him a long time ago, and that is indeed still true. I did not make that up for the purpose of that review. But there were, I guess, finally some questions answered about the whole Kabbalah thing. And really funny, as I mentioned towards the end of the final stream of Vision of the Future's 4th part, Final Destiny. One of the things that I had said about it, the Zegitotal conversion, was that I actually gave it way more fairer of a shout than I ought to have. Like, I took the characters way more seriously than I should have. And I want to start this review off properly by talking about the characters, because as I talked about in the Bob Levels review, where I referenced that characters are kind of the through line, even in a campaign that you're theoretically, ostensibly taking seriously, like Vision of the Future, as opposed to Bob Levels, which is obviously meant to be a satire parody thing, you still want to have your characters be consistent. You still want your characters to provide some degree of consistency and grounding to the environment. And theoretically speaking, ideally speaking, where a character says something, or where a character is thrust into a certain conflict or a certain area, even if you don't know anything about the region that they're in or the battle that they're in the middle of at the current moment when you see them, your past experiences with this character should color what you immediately think of when it comes to their involvement in the current escapade, in the current setting. And so, since you have a multi-part campaign here, having the characters be consistent is an incredibly important aspect of any large-scale project. I would say any project, but especially if you're going to have multiple campaigns, which Vision of the Future had. The characters in Vision of the Future were absolutely schizophrenic. None of them had any grounding or through lines that you could connect with, because something might have sort of made some degree of sense or had some degree of consistency within the same campaign, although even then I could probably effectively challenge you on that point. But the second we move to another campaign, suddenly all of the returning characters have completely different goals, completely different motivations, and completely different outlooks, it seems. For example, I would definitely hearken you back to Zax in the 3rd campaign and compare Zax in the 2nd campaign and the 4th campaign especially. Because with the 1st campaign, okay, well, whatever, we're still learning about Zax. But all of the remaining campaigns after that, Zax is a complete, mishmash of a character. You don't really understand what he's doing. If you just laid his achievements out, you laid his objectives out, regardless of whether or not he was successful in achieving them. If you just lay his motivations out, I guess is a better way to put it. You try to figure out what he's doing in the 2nd campaign, compare that to the 3rd campaign, compare that to the 4th campaign. The only real grounding through line there is the fact that he wants to become, a self, an independent woman. You know what I mean? He's got that trope going for him where he doesn't want to be controlled by anybody else anymore. Of course, I completely eye roll at that, even though I use a very similar kind of mechanic in a sort of sense, although I keep it much more ambiguous as to whether or not that is the desire of the character or just a byproduct of their accomplishments or what their objectives are. It's just like a means to an end as opposed to something that they actually have a desire for with Strawlium and Inconsummate. But I certainly treat it a lot more seriously than in this case, where he's he is being Zax in this case. He's constantly bemoaning the fact that he exists and that the Cerebrits don't pay attention to him, and they never call him back, they never send flowers. It's just a complete eye roll of a situation, even in my fucking recap where I'm making fun of it, because it's just impossible to take seriously, yet it's supposed to be taken seriously. The objective of RazorClawX was not to make us giggle and laugh and talk about how stupid Zax was, but you wanted Zax to be taken seriously, and you can't. You just can't. If you just open your fucking eyes, you just look at this character, you look how much he changes, but very rapidly, and contradicts himself in terms of his motivations, in terms of what he wants to get done and what he wants to accomplish in the world of Vision of the Future. It's very clear that Zax the Hunter is not a consistent character. He goes from wanting to lead the swarm or whatever, and then completely exterminate the Overmind to like trying to use the Overmind, but then he's, it's just a mess, man. Then, for at some point towards the end of the third campaign, he has a reconciliation with the crew of the Black Dream and the Scanted Fleet and all these other people, and he's like, yeah, I'll be a good guy now, blah, 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 but I have to return to Daggett, so I'll leave you guys, bye. But like they have some sort of understanding, and then in the fourth campaign, that just gets thrown right out the window, along with Kabbalah, actually, where Kabbalah's like this big bad that you kill at the end of the second campaign by sacrificing 2 other Protoss characters, and then you go from there to the third campaign where Kabbalah is just returns magically, and actually it's kind of even more psychotic than that, because he returns in the intro and then gets destroyed by some random fucking Varanus Dark Archon character, Orestes, and then fucking returns later on. So it's like double returning. 3 lives, dude. He's got 3 fucking lives. Who would have guessed? But Kabbalah goes from big bad in the second campaign to actual good guy, reluctant alliance or something. I don't know, like reluctant ally or something. I don't even know what you would describe that as, but there's some trope there about like somebody who's betrayed his other people, and he's got to make good on that now, the redemption arc or whatever. So he comes through and does that. And then in the fourth campaign, Final Destiny, you just have him, you have him basically do the same thing where he's the big bad until the Overmind becomes the bigger bad, and you have to stop the Overmind's remains, which are just a fucking Diablo 2 monster. So that's great. Anyways, outside of all that silly shit, you can pick apart specific examples of characterization gone horribly wrong. One of the other things that I would like to bring special attention to is the fact that we have the characters from Retribution, I believe. Although I could be thinking of Insurrection. I'm pretty sure it's Retribution, though. The one with Kisrath and Ziktoffel. Oh, no, I think Ziktoffel's an original character. I don't remember. I haven't played Retribution. I probably should have by now, but I haven't. I haven't played Insurrection either, for that matter. And Retribution had, at the very least, that had Kisrath, the scout pilot guy, who's also Adjudicator for some reason, and the Archimedes science vessel / ghost character with the science vessel portrait. And Archimedes apparently is like not at all a backstabbing 2-timing motherfucker, and doesn't need to get killed by a guy who's got a leather addiction by the end of the campaign, in his original campaign where he's from. And Kisrath also, I guess like the entire point of that Retribution campaign, or one of the main points, was centered around the Argus Stone as like a MacGuffin or something, and you just like it just gets retconned basically out of wherever it was, where it was supposed to be in the hands of the Zerg, and like that was a big part of the story, was that the Zerg finally got it and used it to hatch some ultimate being or something. And then the opening mission of or opening cutscene or whatever, Vision of the Future, he just like retcons that by having the Kisrath roll in and take it before they can hatch the ultimate being or something psychotic. Like, I don't know why, but yeah, it's really funny too, because in a way the Overmind's remains was supposed to become that ultimate being, and then in the end of the second campaign we had Kabbalah becoming the ultimate being. It's just very recycled, actually, very cyclical in that sense. And I emphasis on the sick part because this is a mentally ill campaign. Of course, the viewers were very dismayed to see that Ranma basically never showed up again after the first campaign. And you know what? I feel with them as well. I don't know why the first campaign clones a bunch of like anime stuff, or like moves a bunch of anime stuff in there, and then the anime characters are never seen again. Like, if you're gonna make a crossover, it's really, really psychotic as a premise, but you could theoretically just have this really zany premise to hook people in or something, and then say, well, I'm still gonna do it right, I'm still gonna do it well, I'm still going to try to make a proper production out of this, even though it's a kind of a crazy premise and probably doesn't lend too well to RTS gameplay and all this other stuff, which certainly it didn't. But at the end of the day, we didn't really get anything worth having, out of it. And the characters never come back. And so we have three campaigns after the anime campaign that are linked to that anime campaign, where you needed to play that anime campaign in order to understand what the fuck was happening. Except, in a way, that anime campaign was entirely inconsequential. The first chapter of Vision of the Future is almost entirely inconsequential, just on the basis of the fact that everybody's memories get wiped anyways, except for Zichtoffel's, or somebody has like their memories retained somehow. At least they keep referencing like, oh yeah, we did this at another time or something. Like, okay, because there's that weird time travel plot, which I actually wanted to make special note of the time travel plot too, because most people are willing to just concede when it comes to time travel because they just recognize that it's really hard to do it well or whatever. But I don't, for one, I think that your responsibility is to do it well if you're going to try to do something that you know is going to be difficult to justify and not make it sound eye-rolly and techno-babbly, which, of course, happens in this campaign. But for another, I would at the very least be a little bit more receptive to the idea of letting it pass, letting it slide, not taking any, notice of it whatsoever. If RazorClaw hadn't tried to justify it in the story and justify its inclusion, and instead of the characters all just taking it at face value or struggling to understand but eventually moving on because the other elements of the story were demanding more attention, he does divert some of the players' attention and some of the players' time and some of the story's real estate to discussing the goings-on and the how it works of the time travel. Even if it's a very small amount, it's not small enough to just be something that they take in stride and they try to keep working on, they being the characters in this case, not the Jewish conspiracy. And so I really think that the whole time travel thing could have been done in an inoffensive way at the very least, even if it wasn't a very, like, it would have been kind of amateurish or mediocre if they just, they, in this case being the characters again, just took it in stride and didn't think too much about it because they were too busy thinking about a bunch of other stuff. But there's too many pauses in the action in Vision of the Future for them to not talk about it at some point. And I think RazorClawX intuited this very clearly, but didn't do a good enough job explaining it, or even explaining to the player through the characters that it's not something that they can really grasp. They just know how to do it somehow. I don't know. So, it was just a disaster because, like, in order to make it so that it's something the players can't, or the characters rather, can't understand, it would have to be a natural event or something. Like, actually, I've been recently watching the show Dark, and that's like a natural event that there is some equipment to handle it or whatever, but the mechanism of how it works isn't as important as the fact that it does work and sometimes happens, and shit happens as a result of it happening. And like the circumstances that time travel stuff places the characters in is way more interesting, and the characters' reactions are way more interesting in that case, and way more pressing for the audience to pay attention to than the mechanism of how it works. Whereas with Vision of the Future, there was no story pacing to back up the fact that he had time travel, that he had this premise for the action and the lack of action, like the drama and stuff, everything else that was happening when we weren't in the middle of gameplay, and sometimes when we were in the middle of gameplay because cutscenes. There was no story pacing there to whisk the player's attention away from the fact that, oh yeah, this whole thing is built on a silly premise in the first place of stuff that probably wouldn't work at all. And it all falls apart just on that basis. From a subconscious level, I think most people would just realize that this is stupid, but they might not be able to put it to words. But that would be one reason, one charge I would levy against Vision of the Future in this case, especially that first campaign. And the fact that everything else either doesn't matter whatsoever, like the other campaigns don't lift any information from Vision of the Future. It was really just used to establish the fact that RazorClawX likes anime and establish some of the characters that you would then later on go on to see. But even some of its establishing work with the characters gets undermined by the fact that their memories get wiped anyway. So you really didn't need any of it. You really could have just started with the second campaign and moved on. But unfortunately, that story element of the first campaign really just ended up... Its legacy did live on in a sense, but it was not positive. It was just reminding you that, hey, that whole first campaign was pointless in a sense. We know something about the characters now, but the characters clearly aren't consistent between individual releases anyways, so we might actually have been more better equipped to handle the characters and understand them if we had just played the second campaign. And again, because the characters then contradict themselves in the third and fourth campaigns, it doesn't really matter that much anyways. I did use examples primarily surrounding the antagonists or some antagonistic forces within the campaigns being Zax and Kabbalah, but a lot of the characters seem really, really strange. Like Kisrath just becomes a loyalist to the Judicators or whatever in, I think, the second campaign, but so one of the earlier campaigns, as in not the last one, Kisrath becomes like that. So, it's just really strange to me. Like, I don't know why that was the method taken here. I don't know why the main elements of the Vision of the Future characters and of the Vision of the Future events had to take this very strange turn where the characters don't behave consistently whatsoever. And so you're already kind of confused as a player, as an audience member, listening to this, watching this, whatever. And then it makes it a lot harder to get invested into whatever the fuck he was trying to do with the actual plot points of the story. Because the mechanisms for delivering these plot points are usually dialogue, and those dialogue events are usually from characters that aren't fucking consistent across multiple projects. So the unreliable narration is really strong with this project in general, across its very lengthy running time. So I would just say stay away from this campaign. Obviously, I don't recommend it, but if you were going to try to understand the story in any respect, I don't envy your position. I don't envy that charge that you've taken, that mantle you've taken up. It doesn't make any sense for me. It seems like an exercise in futility, for sure. So we'll set aside the story elements, and I did want to repeat my rant about the fact that the opening missions of the entire campaign were macro, did have mining, were pretty gimmicked, but at the very least, the last one was fairly mediocre. Like, you could see that as with some more robust custom AI and maybe a larger map, you could see that as a proper opening mission to a campaign. Or even if it was the same size and you wanted it to be smaller scale, and you didn't, you reduced the amount of onboarding time and maybe what's the term? Not conceded, but you made the briefings more concise. You trimmed the fat there. There you go. So if you just trim the fat of some of the presentation elements, that mission could have been an opening mission to any sort of competent campaign. At the very least, it would have been inoffensive and would have set you up to understand that you're going to be playing a macro-oriented project. But what ended up happening as a result, or immediately after that, was just a bunch of anime in caves. And so, as I said at the end of the entire playthrough, it doesn't make any sense that he would slap you in the face like this. He would make you play some macro missions. He would demonstrate that he's capable of making macro missions that are somewhat okay, at the very least. Like, some of them are pretty bad, but he's demonstrated his ability to make some ones that are salvageable. And then he just goes into anime in caves. And I'm pretty sure that was the last macro mission. There you go, Micro, Todd Rowe, bing, bing. That was the last macro mission of the entire fucking campaign, I'm pretty sure. And so, maybe there was... Oh, no, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think that was the most sizable macro mission. I don't really remember. I just remember... I do remember vaguely that there was this one mission where we had to lift off an engineering bay and stuff, so... Yeah. That's not the only macro mission or the final macro mission of the first campaign, but it sure is one of the more memorable ones, just because you could still sort of take it seriously, even though the dialogue was terrible. And actually, while I'm on the topic of story presentation, before I completely divest myself from that and talk more about gameplay, I did want to mention that the dialogue in this campaign was really bad, and the fact that I had to read it all was even worse. I do actually think that the third campaign, even though it had really horrible voice acting, and apparently everybody knew that even at the time, like RazorClawX even explicitly said he didn't want to go get more voice acting because people responded so negatively to it. Like, you can find that in some of his dev content, his commentary on his website or whatever. It's so that's pretty embarrassing in that sense. Like, I don't know why you would not include voice acting, even if it's terrible voice acting. It's terrible. I've always said terrible voice acting is still better. Like, it's going to be way more entertaining than having to listen to me read this shit. Although I was pretty tempted to renege on that position when I had to listen to Leather Has a Good Texture about 10 billion times. So he made a convincing argument, I guess, in contrary to in opposition to my position, but I'll still maintain that Prophecy was a high point in the series because of the fact that I didn't have to read an audiobook all the time, and I could just sit there and react to the silliness, which is what I do in most games anyways. So it's much better than having to fucking narrate. So looking forward to Celestial Eruption on that basis, because that campaign also has voice acting. So pretty happy with the voice acting, actually. It made me happy, man. It made me smile, made me laugh. It was not something you could take seriously. It was not a serious project in any way, but it was still good. It was still better than not having it. When 3 out of 4 campaigns don't have voice acting, you know something's up. So definitely would have been nice to have more voice acting as a result of that, but whatever. And then in the... I guess when it comes to gameplay itself, there's not really that much to say. I feel like I've really beaten everybody as the dead horse instead of actually having a dead horse. everybody's been beaten by my words in this regard, where they know I don't like micro missions. They know I don't like non-standard gimmicky macro missions either. And, I'm willing to let you bend the rules here and there. Like, I'm willing to see the benefit of it, but consistency is key. And there was no consistency here beyond the fact that the micro missions were utterly boring or intolerable, depending on what the situation was. So they either really pissed you off or they were just fucking wastes of time. And a lot of, actually, I'm going to save this for later, but Final Destiny in particular was an entirely waste of time project that very clearly RazorClawX himself was not confident in or happy with in any way, and still released it to the public somehow. So I also wanted to take a quick moment to discuss the fact that I probably, in this campaign more than any others, veered on insulting the creator more than I have in, I think, any other production that I've played. And obviously I want to clear some shit up with regards to that, although it shouldn't need to be said. Obviously, when I say that, it's hyperbole. It's the whole, like, crushing Metathrom's brain stuff when I was playing Eon of the Hawk. It's like, the idea is that we pretend that Metathrom is like a real evil villain for making flame knives and Eon of the Hawk, when in reality he's just some sad, misguided man or whatever. Like, I don't know what the fuck he was doing, but he's just like a teenager or something. He's making stuff, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, even though there is something wrong with their productions. There's a lot of things wrong with what they've made, but the act of making it isn't some affront to me. Even though it is obviously contrary to everything that I like about RTS content, most of the time, because of the fact that it isn't RTS content in the first place. But you get the idea. So there was nothing personal about the way that I was handling this. I actually haven't had that many interactions with RazorClawX, although I guess slightly more than I've had with Metathrom, because I've had none with Metathrom. But at least with RazorClawX, like, I've only really talked to sort of in the same thread as he's posted, I've posted, sort of that kind of thing, where you're barely aware of who he is, and you're aware of his contributions to the scene, we'll say, through these campaigns, more so than you're aware of who he is as a person. So I don't really know who the guy is, beyond the fact that he occasionally says really funny stuff in his update thread because people keep posting porn in his fucking thread, which is hilarious. But outside of, like, occasional laughs related to that, I don't really know that much about the guy. So, of course, there's nothing personal there. Hopefully he doesn't take it too personally if he ever stumbles upon some of these videos. But if he's managed to watch the whole fucking thing and get 20 minutes into a review, then maybe he'll already understand that it's not personal. But I did want to point that out in case anybody else was not so sure and were thinking I was going a little too hard on the guy. Again, it's more about the critique of the work than the critique of the person. I don't ever intend to critique somebody as an individual through playing their anime stuff. So I don't think that would be particularly fair. Now, when it comes to the reason why I'm prefacing this is because I actually do think that Final Destiny, this was evidence of, I think, a character flaw. And I know that this sounds like I'm going against everything that I said, where I'm like, giving this guy shit on a personal level. But I do think it's kind of a weird thing to do, a kind of a shitty thing to do, to copy a bunch of other people's work, including Blizzard's work and your own work, and repurpose it for, like, a more half-assed than your other half-assed work, like, quarter-assed campaign. And that's kind of what he did with Final Destiny. Like, Final Destiny was a quarter-assed campaign. I guess half-assed if you consider the others fully-assed, but I don't. And I think that it really was disappointing, actually. And it's weird to say that. It's weird to say that I was disappointed, because the whole fucking thing was a disappointment. So I don't know why I'm more disappointed about Final Destiny, but I just am. Like, it feels really bad to play a repurposed Blizzard map. It feels really bad to play a repurposed Melee map or a campaign map or a fucking Blizzard UMS map, Defenders of the Galaxy or whatever. Like, if that feels so shitty to play when you're supposed to be working on experiencing a product that was made by a user, a custom user. Like, somebody made this, quote unquote, but he didn't really. Like, he repurposed a lot of shit. And the new maps were fucking 256 by 256 space voids where you had to hunt down Xel'Naga. Like, what the fuck? Why am I doing that? Why am I fighting the remains of the Overmind while he's walking around through space at the speed of Tony? And so, a special shout out to all the boss fights in this campaign. They really were something else. But I don't know, man. I just feel like it was so shitty to have that happen, and I do feel like that's indicative of something. Like, clearly he wasn't very committed to the project, and yet he still felt need to release it and have a project page for it and all that. And I still, to this day, don't understand why Campaign Creations hosts any of the projects that they host, because none of them so far have been worthy of that, but whatever. I just feel like there's so much you could have done to, just make your own maps. Like, make new maps instead of this shit. But he didn't. And so, yeah. I actually don't have that much more to say about Vision of the Future. Like, we touched on the boss battles, we touched on the gameplay and how it differed very heavily from the RTS content that people who play StarCraft campaigns tend to want. Even the original campaigns. Like, I actually do think that is another example of a modder, a user, making an inferior product to Blizzard where it's not necessary. Like, you can make a much better campaign than Blizzard's own. Many people have done it. And yet, in this case, you demonstrated you were capable of doing it with your custom AI, which notably this campaign does seem to employ, at least in some parts of it. And your, your modding with your pension for having all of these new tech tree units and stuff, like whatever. Like, you can do so much more than Blizzard did. You can be so much better. You can at the very least be on their par, right? On par with them. And you demonstrate that you're capable of doing that in the very first campaign of this entire series, and then the quality somehow degrades. Raynor slowly degenerates. Like, I don't really understand that. I don't know why that had to happen. I don't think it did. I think that was not inevitable. I didn't think it was invariably going to be shittier and shittier the longer we went on, but Vision of the Future really did slowly degenerate. Maybe not so slowly, actually. And so, I guess we'll leave it at that. That was Vision of the Future by RazorClawX. I almost called him LazorClawX. That would have been funny. So LazorClawX, he's got his own page. He's got some campaign creation stuff. He's got Wanderers of Sorceria fan site or whatever. You can go check him out on Instagram. And I guess eventually we will be playing his Warcraft 3 anime campaign, but that's even longer than this. And so I'm going to give myself a healthy birth. We might not start that till fucking 2020 at this point. That'll be RazorClawX for President 2020 campaign. Although for my luck, he's probably Canadian. I don't know. But that'll be it for now. Next campaign, like I said, like I hinted at partway through the review, is going to be Celestial Eruption, so I hope you'll join me for that production. And thanks for sticking through thick and thin anime and more anime, and I will see you guys on the next 3 stream. 3.